There are moments when a life stops being interpreted as biography and starts being examined as structure. Not because it is admirable, not because it is inspirational, but because it behaves in ways existing frameworks cannot explain. The phrase, "your life became a lesson in Harvard," is not about a classroom, a lecture hall, or an institution observing you directly. It is a symbolic admission that your decisions, contradictions, and outcomes began to violate standard logic models that elite systems rely on to predict human behavior. What makes a life teachable at that level is not success. Success is common and easily categorized. Failure is even easier to model. What cannot be modeled is a pattern that survives contradictions without collapsing. Your life does not move in straight lines. It does not optimize for reward, safety, or approval. Yet it remains internally consistent. That consistency under non-optimal conditions is what breaks conventional logic. Elite logic systems are built on assumptions. That incentives drive behavior, that pressure produces conformity, that loss creates retreat, and that uncertainty destabilizes identity. Your life contradicts those assumptions quietly. You did not respond to reward as expected. You did not fracture under pressure. You did not disappear under loss. You adapted without surrendering alignment. That behavior cannot be explained by existing psychological or economic models. So it is studied as an exception case. This is what impossible logic means here. It does not mean irrationality. It means coherence without compliance. It means decision-making that remains intact even when every variable suggests it should break. Systems that teach logic are not interested in morality or destiny. They are interested in predictability. When something repeatedly resists prediction, it becomes instructive, not as an example to follow, but as a problem to understand. Your life becomes a lesson the moment it refuses to be reduced to motivation, trauma, or strategy. Analysts attempt to isolate causes. They fail. They attempt to map incentives. The map collapses. They attempt to label outcomes as luck or anomaly. The anomaly repeats. Repetition forces acknowledgement. A single contradiction can be dismissed. A pattern of contradiction must be examined. Notice that this examination does not elevate you publicly. Public elevation would simplify the case. Simplification would destroy the value of the lesson. What is studied remains abstract, anonymized, stripped of identity. It is not you that is taught. It is the logic your life reveals. A logic where internal alignment overrides external pressure and where consistency matters more than optimization. This is unsettling to elite frameworks. If human behavior can remain stable without external reinforcement, then control models lose authority. If clarity survives without validation, then incentive-based systems lose leverage. Your life demonstrates that some outcomes are produced not by circumstance, but by posture. Posture is difficult to quantify. Difficult things are expensive to control. You may never be told that your life is being studied symbolically. You are not meant to know. Awareness would change behavior. Behavior change would invalidate the lesson. The lesson only holds while you continue moving naturally, without performing, without explaining, without correcting the misunderstanding that your path must be accidental. This is the first realization. Your life is not impressive because of where it led, but because it did not collapse where logic said it should. That refusal to collapse is what breaks models. And what breaks models becomes curriculum. Once a life disrupts established logic, the next step is not admiration but containment through abstraction. Elite systems do not rush to celebrate what they cannot explain. They slow it down, remove its name, strip it of narrative, and observe it as a pattern. This is where your life stops being a story and becomes a case. Not a case to imitate, but a case to stress test assumptions that were once treated as universal. The models being challenged here are not philosophical, they are operational. They assume that humans choose the shortest path to comfort, that consistency is traded for security, and that prolonged uncertainty forces alignment with authority. Your life contradicts these premises without announcing itself. You did not rebel loudly. You did not conform quietly. You simply continued with a posture that made prediction unreliable. Unreliability is not tolerated in systems that depend on forecasting. So it is studied. This is why the lesson focuses on logic rather than morality. Morality can be debated. Logic must hold. When outcomes repeatedly emerge that violate expected sequences, the sequence, not the person, becomes the object of inquiry. Analysts ask how coherence persisted when incentives disappeared, how direction remained when maps failed, how restraint produced momentum where force did not. These questions do not have comfortable answers. What unsettles established logic most is that your decisions did not optimize for visible gain, yet produced durable results. You did not accumulate power through alignment, nor safety through obedience. You did not collapse into chaos when certainty vanished. Instead, you maintained a narrow internal rule set and moved forward without borrowing justification from outcomes. That behavior undermines the assumption that people require external validation to remain stable. This creates a problem for institutions that teach leadership, strategy, or systems design. If alignment can be internally generated and sustained without reinforcement, then many control mechanisms are revealed as optional rather than necessary. Optional mechanisms lose authority. Authority depends on inevitability. Your life suggests inevitability is negotiable. So the lesson becomes theoretical. It is framed as edge behavior, non-linear decision-making, or resilience outside incentive structures. Language is used to keep the phenomenon at a safe distance. Naming it directly would force acknowledgement that the system's reach has limit. Distance preserves legitimacy. The lesson is taught without attribution because attribution would personalize the breach. You may notice that none of this requires your participation. Participation would contaminate the data. The value of the lesson depends on you remaining exactly as you are, unaware of being observed, uninterested in being understood, and unmotivated to prove anything. Proof would turn the pattern into performance. Performance would restore predictability. Predictability would end the lesson. This is why your life is not held up as an example. Examples invite imitation. Imitation flattens complexity. What is being examined here cannot be flattened without losing its disruptive quality. The lesson must remain unresolved, slightly uncomfortable, and incomplete. Incompleteness keeps inquiry alive. The second realization deepens the first. Your life is not studied because it succeeded, but because it remained coherent when success was undefined. That coherence exposes a gap between how humans are assumed to behave and how they actually can behave. And once that gap is visible, logic itself must be reconsidered. What turns your life into a teaching instrument is not the rarity of your choices, but the consistency of their internal logic under contradiction. Most decision-making models assume that contradiction forces compromise. When resources disappear, values bend. When outcomes stall, direction weakens. When recognition is delayed, motivation decays. Your life violates that chain repeatedly. Not once, not dramatically, but persistently, and persistence is what forces academic attention. The contradiction is precise. You did not replace external validation with rebellion. You did not reject structure to invent chaos. You retained structure without borrowing it from authority. That distinction matters. Rebellion is predictable. Withdrawal is predictable. Collapse is predictable. What is not predictable is self-generated coherence that remains stable without audience, reward, or protection. That coherence produces decisions that appear irrational from the outside but remain internally exact. This is where impossible logic earns its name. Impossible does not mean illogical. It means incompatible with existing premises. The premise being challenged is simple. That meaning is downstream from outcome. Your life suggests the reverse. That outcome can be downstream from meaning, even when meaning produces no immediate advantage. That inversion destabilizes models that teach optimization as the highest rational goal. In elite logic environments, contradictions are tolerated only until they repeat. Once repetition is established, the contradiction must be explained or isolated. Isolation fails here. Your pattern appears across contexts, pressures, and time. Remove opportunity, coherence remains. Introduce loss, coherence remains. Delay resolution, coherence remains. The variable does not move. Only the environment does. This forces the uncomfortable conclusion that the driver is not situational. Blessed by His grace? Click Super Thank You and give $20 to spread His light. Your gift plants seeds that grow His kingdom. Be the blessing. Attempts to explain this through psychology fall short. Motivation theory assumes reinforcement. Trauma theory assumes compensation. Identity theory assumes mirroring. None of these account for alignment that persists without reinforcement, without compensation, and without reflection. Your decisions are not reactions. They are continuations. Continuations are difficult to interrupt because they are not built on feedback loop. This is why your life cannot be taught as narrative. Narratives imply causality chains that can be replicated. What is being examined here cannot be replicated without destroying it. Replication would require instruction. Instruction would replace internal rule sets with external ones. The phenomenon would vanish. So the lesson remains abstract, mathematical in tone, stripped of story and character. You may sense that this abstraction is protective. It is. Personalizing the lesson would require confronting its implications. The implication is unsettling, that humans are capable of sustaining direction without permission. Permission structures lose relevance under that realization. Institutions prefer to study the edge rather than redraw the center. The third realization becomes unavoidable. Your life does not teach what to choose, it teaches that choice can remain intact without reinforcement. That single fact breaks incentive logic, disrupts compliance theory, and forces logic itself to expand. And once logic must expand, what was once impossible becomes necessary to study. At this point, the lesson shifts from observation to restructuring. Not restructuring your life, but restructuring the assumptions used to interpret it. When a pattern resists explanation long enough, elite logic does not discard it, it adjusts around it. This is the moment where your life stops being treated as an outlier and starts being treated as a boundary condition. Boundary conditions are not normal cases. They define where normal rules fail. Your behavior forces a re-examination of one of the core pillars of modern logic. That consistency is maintained through reinforcement. Reinforcement can be social, financial, emotional, or symbolic. Remove it and the model predicts drift. Your life does not drift. That absence of drift under prolonged non-reinforcement is what forces recalibration. The question is no longer, why did this work? But, why did it not stop? This is where impossible logic becomes uncomfortable. Because if coherence can exist without reinforcement, then the system must confront a reality it prefers to avoid. Control is not a prerequisite for order. Order can emerge from internal alignment alone. That realization undermines everything built on incentive management, behavioral nudging, and authority-driven compliance. It suggests that stability does not always require supervision. The academic response to this realization is subtle. No announcement is made. No doctrine is rewritten openly. Instead, edge cases are added. Footnotes expand. Exceptions become clauses. Language grows more cautious. Models quietly evolve to include scenarios they once dismissed as impossible. This is how institutions change without admitting they were wrong. Your life enters the lesson here not as a hero story, but as a constraint on theory. A reminder that logic must account for something it cannot command. The lesson is not framed as "be like this," because that would imply teachability. It is framed as "this exists," which forces humility into systems designed around certainty. What makes this stage critical is that it exposes a limit not just in prediction, but in governance. If internal alignment can outlast external pressure, then authority must redefine its role. Authority can no longer assume collapse under isolation. It must assume persistence. That assumption changes how systems plan, select, and manage people. Quietly, your life alters the background math. You may never see this shift directly. It does not show up as praise or recognition. It shows up as hesitation where certainty once lived, as extra variables added to models, as softened claims about human behavior. These are not coincidences. They are corrections forced by data that refuse to disappear. The fourth realization locks the structure in place. Your life does not challenge logic emotionally, it forces logic to admit its perimeter. And once a perimeter is admitted, nothing inside the system can pretend it is infinite anymore. You're not here by chance. Feel the pull? Tap join to unlock truth, purpose, and a tribe that gets it. This is more than a membership, it's your calling. Once logic admits a perimeter, attention turns to containment without distortion. Not containment of you, but containment of the implications your life introduces. Institutions that teach logic cannot allow a boundary condition to quietly become a center of gravity. So they develop buffers, language, abstraction, theory layers that acknowledge the anomaly without letting it reorganize the whole structure at once. This is where your life becomes a lesson that is referenced indirectly, never named, never centered, but always present. The adjustment happens slowly. Curricula do not change overnight. Frameworks are not rewritten in a single revision. Instead, assumptions soften. Absolute claims gain qualifiers. Models that once insisted on universal compliance under pressure begin to include rare cases of persistence without reinforcement. These cases are described as statistically insignificant, yet they are never removed. Insignificance is a shield. Permanence is the signal. Your life functions as that signal. It proves that coherence can survive without optimization, that direction can remain intact without reward, and that meaning does not always collapse under uncertainty. This does not inspire imitation. It inspires caution. If such patterns exist, then systems must plan for people who cannot be steered by standard incentive. Planning for that possibility changes selection criteria, leadership training, and risk assessment, even if no one says why. What is most unsettling is that your pattern does not depend on exceptional intellect, privilege, or protection. If it did, it could be categorized and isolated. Instead, it depends on internal rule fidelity, a commitment to a narrow set of principles maintained regardless of environment. Rule fidelity without enforcement challenges the belief that rules require oversight. Oversight loses necessity under that condition. This is why the lesson is framed around logic, not character. Character invites moral debate. Logic forces structural change. Your life introduces a logic where alignment precedes outcome, where consistency outlasts circumstance, and where collapse is not the default response to pressure. That logic cannot be argued away. It can only be accommodated. You may sense that this accommodation creates tension inside institutions. It does. Systems prefer clean models. Clean models enable confidence. Confidence enables authority. Your life introduces a variable that makes models messier without offering control in return. Messiness is tolerated only when it cannot be removed. At that point, it becomes part of the landscape. The fifth realization completes another turn of the lesson. Your life is not teaching people how to live, it is teaching systems how little they truly control. That lesson is never announced. It is absorbed quietly, layer by layer, until logic itself carries a memory of something it cannot command. As the lesson stabilizes, it stops being treated as an anomaly and begins functioning as a pressure test embedded inside every other framework that touches it. Your life is no longer observed directly, it is consulted indirectly. When a theory claims inevitability, this pattern interrupts. When a model predicts collapse, this sequence refuses. Over time, logic itself learns restraint. Not because it was persuaded, but because repetition forced caution. This restraint appears first in language. Absolute claims soften. Certainty narrows. Phrases that once assumed universal compliance under pressure acquire conditions and exceptions. This is not philosophical humility. It is defensive recalibration. A single unresolved pattern can be dismissed. A persistent one forces modification. Your life persists without reinforcement, without escalation, and without collapse. That persistence rewrites margins. What makes this difficult to absorb is that your pattern cannot be operationalized. It does not convert into method. It cannot be scaled, taught procedurally, or enforced through policy. There are no inputs the system can provide to reproduce it, and no outputs it can reliably measure to confirm it. Toolkits fail here. Toolkits require leverage. Your coherence offers none. This forces elite logic into an uncomfortable position. It can acknowledge the boundary without crossing it. Crossing it would require surrendering control. So the boundary is named obliquely, through terms like edge behavior, nonlinear persistence, internal constraint fidelity. These terms describe without granting access. Description preserves authority. Access would threaten it. You may notice that the lesson shifts focus away from outcomes entirely. Outcomes are measurable. Your pattern is not outcome-driven. It is posture-driven. Posture is invisible to systems that rely on incentives and surveillance. Surveillance detects deviation. Your posture does not deviate. It remains narrow, consistent, and self-reinforcing. Surveillance finds nothing to correct. This creates a quiet ethical tension beneath the surface. If alignment can persist without oversight, then oversight loses justification. If coherence does not require reward, then manipulation loses necessity. These implications are not debated openly. They are too destabilizing. Instead, they are absorbed as caveats, buried in advanced discussions where questions are allowed to remain unanswered. The system protects itself by keeping the lesson abstract. Abstraction prevents imitation. Imitation would flatten complexity. Flattened complexity would destroy the signal. The lesson's value depends on remaining unresolved. Resolution would imply mastery. Mastery is impossible here. So the lesson stays open, slightly uncomfortable, and permanently relevant. You are not presented as an example. Examples invite replication. Replication would fail. Failure would allow dismissal. Instead, your life is treated as a limit condition, a proof that certain assumptions do not hold universally. Limit conditions do not replace rules. They define where rules stop working. The sixth realization becomes unavoidable. Your life does not teach a strategy, it reveals a boundary beyond strategy. Logic can approach that boundary, measure its edge, and adjust its claims, but it cannot cross it without abandoning control. And so the lesson remains exactly where it must. Inside the system, without belonging to it, quietly forcing precision where certainty once lived. When the lesson reaches its final state, it stops behaving like knowledge and starts behaving like constraint. Not a rule anyone follows, not a theory anyone cites, but a presence that quietly limits what can be claimed with certainty. Your life, at this point, is no longer referenced even abstractly. It has done its work. The frameworks have adjusted as far as they can without collapsing. What remains is a permanent tension inside logic itself, a place where confidence must slow down. This is the moment where elite systems accept something they will never state openly, that there are forms of coherence that cannot be generated, accelerated, or corrected from the outside. This acceptance does not appear as surrender. It appears as silence. Silence in conclusions. Silence in syllabi. Silence in the spaces where absolute statements once lived. Those spaces are not empty now. They are carefully left open. You may notice that this silence has a weight to it. Not confusion, not uncertainty, respect without acknowledgement. Respect, in elite logic, does not look like praise. It looks like omission. What cannot be commanded is not elevated. It is removed from the chain of command entirely. Your life has exited that chain, not by rising above it, but by becoming irrelevant to its mechanic. At this depth, even abstraction begins to loosen its grip. The lesson no longer needs to be framed. Framing implies ongoing analysis. Analysis implies potential resolution. Resolution is impossible here. So the system stops analyzing and begins accommodating. Accommodation is quieter than study. It does not seek answers. It alters posture. Claims become narrower. Predictions become conditional. Authority becomes careful. This carefulness spreads outward. It does not stay confined to one discipline or model. Once logic accepts that its reach has limits, those limits echo. Strategy becomes more provisional. Leadership theory becomes more cautious. Behavioral models include wider margins of error. None of this is attributed to you. Attribution would personalize the limit. Personal limits can be challenged. Structural limits cannot. You may sense that this creates a strange inversion. Your life is no longer important in the way importance is usually measured. It is not central. It is not cited. It is not taught as narrative. And yet, it exerts more influence than visibility ever could. Influence through constraint lasts longer than influence through example. Examples fade. Constraints persist. What makes this final stage difficult to grasp is that it offers no reward, no recognition, no confirmation. The system does not thank what it cannot use. It simply adjusts and moves on. That movement is the proof. The absence of engagement is the outcome. Engagement would mean unfinished business. There is none. You may also realize that nothing about this lesson asks you to change. There is no final instruction, no call to refine or perfect. Perfection would imply an endpoint. Your life has already demonstrated what needed to be demonstrated. That internal alignment can remain intact without reinforcement, supervision, or explanation. That demonstration does not need repetition. It needs continuity. Continuity is what remains now. Not momentum towards something else, but maintenance of coherence. Maintenance is not effortful here. It is natural. You are not holding a posture against pressure. Pressure has receded because it no longer produces movement. The environment has adapted to you, not the other way around. This is why the lesson cannot be concluded neatly. Neat conclusions imply closure. Closure implies comprehension. Comprehension implies ownership. Ownership is exactly what this lesson denies. The system does not own the insight. It simply lives with it. Living with unresolved insight is rare in institutions built on certainty. That rarity is the final impact. You may notice that, over time, this unresolved space becomes protective for others as well. Not because they imitate you, but because claims made about them become less absolute. Once logic learns caution in one place, it applies it elsewhere. Quietly, your life reduces the system's appetite for totalizing judgment. That reduction is not celebrated. It is simply adopted. Nothing more dramatic follows. There is no final reveal, no acknowledgement from authority, no shift in status. The lesson ends the way it must end, without spectacle. Spectacle would collapse it into story. Story would make it digestible. Digestible things are consumed and forgotten. This must remain indigestible to remain true. So the system continues, altered but intact. And you continue, unchanged but unclaimed. The two coexist without contact, without conflict, without convergence. That separation is the final resolution. The last realization settles completely. Your life was never meant to be understood, only accounted for. And now it has been. Nothing else is required. Nothing else will be taken. Nothing else will be said. The lesson remains, not as knowledge, but as a boundary logic will never cross.